Destin, then we went to the Virgin Islands.
That was probably a needed escape.
The Destin trip was hard because that was our family spot. So
Yeah.
with Daniel not being there, it was kind of
I get.
in your face.
Yeah.
I remarked, going to the restaurant that first time, and my older boys came down for a couple of days. You're a party of four, just weird stuff like that. But Laura and I went to the Virgin Islands and had a really good time. That was kind of a way to get away from it all and
kind of charge up.
Connect, yeah.
That's good.
Yep.
Glad.
All right, so you're ready on Zoom?
Who's missing?
Nathan's going to be sitting right here.
Yep.
Jason, I didn't even say hey. Sorry, man.
I've been bouncing around pretty busy, so sorry about that.
Wasn't intentional on my part.
Not because I don't love you.
I hear you.
I'd say speak pretty loud so that he can hear you. The way that John's going to hear you is
From the microphone on the left.
the microphone on laptop. We
Okay.
can get everything to speak the same language.
All right.
So projecting will be
Trautwein.
Handline and Trautwein.
On the phone one time.
You did.
I did to try to get you to come speak to another one, but you already booked. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
So while we have a little bit of time, we've got 3 minutes. We may want to go ahead and make sure all of our cell phones are on silent.
Yeah, I just
Yeah, we did.
because mine wasn't until
That was
midnight.
like perfectly timed to remind us.
Trying to make sure I don't have that other phone with me. No, I'm good.
So this is a YouTube stream getting shared on Facebook, and there's a comment section and everything. So it's the exact same experience as Facebook. It's posted through Facebook to the event. And I think as soon as you tell us to go live, we probably could, I'm going to hop on and share.
Yeah, I would make sure to bug. I don't know if you can send a message to all the invitees of the Facebook thing so they, don't get confused, right?
Well, it'll be in the event.
Okay.
The post will be in the event and on the page. Tammy,
Okay.
you can post it in multiple places, right?
Yeah.
Over the next few minutes? Yeah.
And Tammy, are you going to share the questions that come in live?
And this is going to be recorded as well.
Yeah.
So what we'll do, Sheriff's Office, what I'm going to do on our social media is after it's like YouTube, and then we'll share it. Then
Great.
people can, that's like 110,000 people
Awesome.
that will
So
share it
Bob's
out.
sharing that on your-
Yeah, we'll share the YouTube like tomorrow or something, sometime in the next day or two.
I'm ready to share it for mine as soon as.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook, YouTube live event. This is our 4th annual Suicide Awareness and Prevention event, and we are happy to be joined tonight with a great panel of speakers. This is our first time to try to do a live event. Our good friend COVID has made sure that we couldn't have a lot of people with us, but we are happy to have hopefully a lot of you joining us. We are also going to be recording this event so we can have people be able to view it and share it hopefully a lot of times. And we really sincerely hope that there will be a lot of things that will be of benefit to people. We never know who is going to be watching. We don't know, if it will be families that hurting, if it'll be people that have been impacted by suicide. We do know there are a lot of people that are hurting in the world today. There's a lot of people that suffer from suicide, and that we want to do, we're a very caring community, and there is a lot of people that we want to show how much we do care. And so I found out many years ago that a lot of people don't know that we do have a lot of people in our community that do care. And so as we were planning this event, we were trying to think of a name for it, and one of the speakers that lost his son just a few months ago said, we just want to have an open conversation about suicide. We want to be able to talk openly about it so we can hopefully end some of the stigma, some of the things that are associated with it, and put to rest some of the things that are just not true, and show people that it's not a subject that you have to run away from. And it is that we do have a community that loves and cares. And just today, everywhere I went as a county commissioner in my job, I ran into people that said, oh, I lost my sister to suicide. I lost a child to suicide. I have my best friend died of suicide. And so it was nowhere did I turn today that I did not have someone in my path that had been affected by suicide. So I'm Cindy Mills, and on our panel tonight, we have Representative Kevin Tanner, we have former Representative Mike Dungan, we have John Trautwein, that's joining us via internet. We have him with Zoom. We have Sheriff Ron Freeman, and we have Associate Pastor from Mountain Lake Church, where we are doing our Facebook Live and YouTube Live, and it's Nathan Cassidy. So we're going to start tonight with Mike Dungan, and Mike's just going to take a few minutes and he's just going to tell his story. And I've been in constant prayer for Mike for a few months. I can't imagine. I'm not going to stand here and pretend like I know what he's been through, he and his wife, but I will tell you I have great respect and admiration, because from the moment they lost their son, there was no pretense, there was no pretending that it was something that it wasn't. And from the moment that it happened, he shared with the public what they were going through. And I know that couldn't be easy, but I know it had a great impact on affecting other people. And I appreciate him being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. You know, didn't think I'd be sitting here 6 months ago, but if you think back to first week of April this year, we were at the height of the COVID lockdown. Everybody was scared. No one was coming out of their house. It was kind of the darkest time. It was Easter week. My son Daniel, 20 years old, was home from Georgia, been kicked out of, like all the college students. He was grumpy because he was getting kicked out of college and had to come home with his parents. On the night of April 6th, he did a jigsaw puzzle with my wife and I. He did a little stuff with the pool table, and then apparently we found out, stayed up till 1 a.m. Doing his homework for his group project with his business class kids at UGA. And then at 5 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from North Fulton Emergency Room that Daniel was in critical condition with a gunshot wound to the head. It's impossible to say how devastating that was and how incredibly difficult that journey that I'm still on, and my wife and my other boys and many other in Daniel's friend group. So when we went to the hospital and found out that he had actually called 911 after he had shot himself, we had a little glimmer of hope that maybe it was going to end up okay. And it was Easter week, so we prayed and we got everybody we knew involved. But remember, it's COVID, so no one's coming to our house to give us a hug. There's no gatherings at the church. We're alone. My wife and I are trapped in the COVID lockdown in our own house. Can't even go see Daniel in the hospital. It was just devastating. But we had great support from church friends and everything, though it was virtual. And that first night, when we didn't know what was going to happen, Daniel was in the hospital, and I said, Lori, should we do a caring bridge? If you remember Caring Bridge, this is a sort of website where you can track people who are ill and keep people on social media informed. And Lori, my wife, said, absolutely. And I said, well, how honest should we be? Should we be totally open about everything? And she looked at me and said, we need to be 100% honest. And like many things in my marriage, and probably the men here would agree, that my wife makes a lot of the best decisions. And she really wanted to make sure that we were as open as possible in order to anybody out there who might hear Daniel's story, if it can make a difference, we wanted to make a difference. So Daniel was in the hospital for what ended up being 18 days. And early on we had hope, but unfortunately brain injuries, the first 3 days there's a lot of bleeding and swelling and basically became hopeless. He was on a ventilator in the ICU, and we consulted the very best doctors in Atlanta about rehabilitation, about chances and tests. And my brother's a doctor, and he came and he consulted with us, and basically we had a unanimous opinion, and even myself looked at some of the tests, being sort of a closet scientist at times, and decided that Daniel had zero hope of ever being conscious again and no quality of life. And we knew he didn't want to live as a person on a ventilator in a nursing home. And think about this. At that time, you couldn't go to the nursing home. When we had sent Daniel there, we couldn't see him. Nobody could see him. In fact, now you can't even see people today in a nursing home. So we decided that we wanted to look into organ donation, which is something Laura and I felt about, and we had him evaluated for organ donation. And I won't get into the medical stuff because it's not important, but essentially they said he was not a candidate for organ donation. So we were devastated. Very upset, because we felt that was maybe what good God could do with this terrible situation, and we've been praying for a miracle. We got our miracle. It wasn't the miracle we wanted, which was Daniel was going to live and come back to us. But the next day, a doctor at the hospital heard through the grapevine that Daniel wasn't going to be an organ donor, and he thought that was crazy, thought that was a mistake. He gossiped to the nurses. The nurses told us. I called this doctor, who was not his regular doctor. And then about that same time, when we were trying to think about reevaluating organ donation, we found his note, his suicide note. And I'll talk a little bit more later about that note. But one thing in the note he did say is he wanted to be an organ donor. And I ended up talking to the doctor. We redid some tests and found out that he was actually a fantastic candidate for being an organ donor. And then we had to do something that's kind of believe that you would have to do it as a parent. We had to schedule a time for your son to die. And 11 o'clock on April 25th, Daniel went to the board and became an organ donor. His heart is in a 30-year-old woman in North Carolina who I understand now is home and doing well. His kidneys are in Georgia, and so is his liver. And again, all four of these people are doing well. But what we found was that God gave us a miracle. It wasn't a miracle we wanted, but it was a miracle that something good could come out of such an incredibly awful and absolutely terrible situation. And as we plotted through after this, and what I discovered, and Cindy mentioned it, is that I found all around me were lots of other people who had been through a suicide. And I knew a few. I knew John, who wanted to submit it just very tangentially through a lot of common friends. I had a good friend from church who lost his son, but all these phone calls came in and said, I'm so-and-so, and I lost my daughter, lost my son, lost my brother. And it was like being surrounded by these people who just came out of the woodwork, but nobody was talking about it. And something that really struck me is through my job in the legislature and through now working for the Lieutenant Governor, I know a lot of people you would say are, quote, famous, at least statewide famous. And two people, one of which I guarantee everyone would know their name, spoke to me in confidence and said, I had a young adult child who attempted suicide X years ago, but we never talked about it. Never told anybody, didn't say anything. And it's just part of the problem. We'll get more into that today. But one of the people that I did talk to was a guy named John Trautwein, who introduced here in a second, who, like I said, lives a few miles down the road in Johns Creek, and let you tell his story, but he already had been very active in suicide prevention with what happened to him, and reached out to him and went and had a socially distanced beer in his backyard, and he was a great comfort. And this fraternity of men who've lost their sons is a horrible fraternity to join, but it's a tight one because we can understand what happened. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John Trautwein to talk about his son Will and talk about the Will to Live Foundation, which he has started and has done great things with. So John, I will turn it over to you if the internet gods are so willing.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I hope you all can hear me. So first of all, Mike, our hearts are broken for you and your family. And, obviously if there's anyone who understands what you are going through over the past few months, I'm one of those, unfortunately. I'm going through a difficult time myself right now because in exactly 1 month, it will be the 10-year anniversary of the suicide death of my oldest child, my son, Will Trautwein. Will was 15. He was a freshman at Northview High School. He was big and strong, healthy, popular, successful in all walks of life, good student, very good athlete, fabulous musician. He had an army of friends, as I always say, and it was so much fun to see him with his friends. He was perfect. As far as I was concerned, he was the happiest boy I knew. And he died. He went to bed on a Thursday night, October 14th. I watched him, as I said, "Love you, man," as he walked upstairs. I thought I was watching a very happy, healthy, content young man. And about 4 hours later, he hung himself on his bedroom door. My wife, Susie, found him the very next morning. We were absolutely stunned. We had absolutely no idea that anything was wrong with him in any way, shape, or form. His 2 brothers, Tommy and Michael, and his sister Holland, who all idolized him and worshiped their big brother, had no idea he was struggling. We have a happy home. We have a loving home. Suicide, mental illness, things like that doesn't happen to the Trautwein home. That doesn't happen in our area, in our community. I never mentioned the word suicide or depression until I learned that it caused my son to die. And like Mike, that weekend, the devastation was unparalleled, and I just remember thinking how and why, and people came out of the woodwork talking about the struggles that they've gone through with members of their family or friends or their friend network. It wasn't all just suicide, it was depression, it was suicide attempts, and people that I knew very well had stories that they never ever shared. Well, Will never told any of his friends that he was struggling. He never told me he was struggling. We were close. We had a great relationship. And I remember being absolutely stunned when I met with a therapist that very weekend, and he said to me, "Was Will one of the leaders?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He goes, "Oh yeah, that's really common." What do you mean it's really common? No, suicide doesn't happen to kids like Will. It just doesn't. No, John, it does. And I remember feeling so inadequate. I was so uneducated. I was so unaware. And because of that, my son died. I kept telling him, "Isn't this great? Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this great?" And he kept saying to me, "Yeah, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this great?" He had depression. Over 95% of the suicides that occur, and there's going to be about 15 suicides today in America. 95% of those are the result of some form of a diagnosable mental illness. And I didn't know it. Nobody knows it. 1 in 6. Actually, it used to be 1 in 6. Now it's 1 in 5 of the people that you all know suffer from some form of depression. It's treatable and it's beatable and it's common and it's okay. But it is an illness. And that's what was so interesting to me, because I didn't know this. It is also a maskable illness, right? So my son didn't let on he was struggling in any way. He's a good salesman. I'm in sales. He's just like me. He made everybody think he was great. And I remember thinking, he never talked to anybody. He never wanted to tell anybody that he was not okay. And if he would have told his dad that he was not okay, his dad would have talked him out of it. Because his dad thought that depression was a character flaw. His dad thought that depression was a choice. And because of that, Will didn't talk about it. And because of that, we lost him. And I sit here before all of you today to tell this story that I remember thinking right then, how I didn't want anyone else to ever feel what I'm feeling and what I felt that weekend and what Mike felt back in April. I didn't want anyone to ever have to go through this. And nobody talks about suicide. And I remember I said to myself and I said to my wife, we have to find a way to get these kids to talk. I was really focusing on teenagers. Because I was learning that every 2 hours a teenager in America takes their life. And I had no idea. And there are kids just like Will. And I remember thinking, if Will would have just talked about it, or if Will would have felt comfortable talking about it, if somebody would have ever said to Will, hey, it's okay to not be okay. Maybe a culture would have been created and we can share and we can express that we're not doing well and it's okay to be that. And in 2010, back in October, it certainly wasn't the case where kids were willing to talk about it, where parents were willing to talk about it, where I was willing to talk about it. I'm telling you all right now, 10 years ago, in September of 2010, I would not have watched this show. I would have said, oh, this is great. I'm so glad you guys are doing it. It's great stuff. But I'm good. Trautweins are good. We're fine. Thank you. I will not even donate some money, but yeah, I don't need to hear it. So that's how clueless I was. Because depression is real. It's everywhere. It's treatable, it's beatable, and it's okay. And I remember thinking, I'm going to start something to get people to talk, and I didn't know how to do it. And it was at Will's funeral where I was giving the eulogy that I started to see in the audience. I grew up in Chicago, and I started to see my friends from Chicago, my friends from grade school, middle school, high school, college, my old baseball teammates. I was a baseball player, played baseball for a long time, 7 years of professional ball, right? So I have a ton of old teammates, or a lot of them hopped on a plane to be with me just 3 days after Will died. And I was giving the eulogy, and I realized that the people that I was the closest with in my life, those guys that I learned about life with, I was in the trenches with, I shared my firsts with, they were all there. They were my life friends, I call them. They were like my life teammates. And I was looking at all of Will's teammates in the audience at the funeral. They were all there in their lacrosse jerseys from Northview High School. They were devastated. And I remember just saying to them, you know, Will loved you and he would want you guys to love each other. And as I started to notice my own teammates, I realized how I was going to get kids to talk, or how I was going to try to get kids to talk to each other. I was going to create a foundation that shows or gets kids and teenagers to recognize the love and the hope, but perhaps most importantly, the understanding that they have in their friends. And that's how the Will to Live Foundation started. I wanted to build better relationships. If I can get these kids to recognize how close of friends that they have, and they have peers sitting right next to them in the classroom, in the dugout, in the church youth group, whatever it might be, that truly understand what they're going through, because they're going through it as well. Because really, who understands the life of a teenager better than another teenager? It's not their father. I proved that. So the Will to Live Foundation was formed by Will's friends and my family to create this concept of who are your life teammates and do they know? And don't be afraid to talk to them and be there for them and share the fact that you might not be okay. And if I can do that, I can raise this awareness, which is exactly what Mike and his family is trying to do right now. And I'm really proud of Mike. I'm so, I met him just, we've known of each other for years. I met him maybe 2 months after he lost his son. And I was just so pleased, because like me, he didn't want anyone else to go through this. He wasn't afraid or embarrassed because his son died of an illness, not a character flaw. His son died of an illness, not a bad parenting. And I think that's what's so important, to recognize that depression and the mental illnesses are the real cause of the suicide. That helped me tremendously as a dad trying to struggle through, how could my son lose the will to live? So the Will Live Foundation was formed, and over these 10 years, we've had so much fun building like teammates bonds, using the powerful voice of kids to say, hey, life is hard, but I'm here with you because it's hard for me too, right? And we used baseball, we used school, we used football, we used any sport you could think of to say, hey, football is hard, just like life is hard, and sometimes you need a friend to help you get through it. And create this ability to talk about it. And this is what it's so hard for me when I get asked to speak, and for some reason I can't. Because when I talk about it, I feel better. When I talk about it, I know that Will is smiling down on me. Because he never talked about it because he was embarrassed about it. He was afraid to talk about it. There wasn't a culture formed in his circle that encouraged us to not be afraid to say, hey, I'm not okay. And that's how it all started. And here we are 10 years later, and every day the foundation is a major part of my thought process. And it's helped me every day, because right now I am in therapy. Right now, this very minute, I'm talking about it. And you all are my therapist. And I think that's what's just so important, because it makes us comfortable to talk about it. And that way the illness can be treated. And that's really what the foundation is all about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I don't think we can underestimate the value of talking about it. We had last year our first pastors summit, where we talked about mental health with just pastors, and drug overdose with just pastors. And to get pastors to stand up in their congregation, in their pulpits, and share mental health and drug overdose and things like that, starting that conversation and empowering pastors to know it has really done so much to help our community. And I had pastors come up and say, I never knew that. I never knew. And getting our sheriff's office involved in that has really it has done so much. And when we had our first suicide summit, I had people that I even went to church with that I had no idea, that had sat behind me 10 years, that came up and said, thank you. I have walked around a man that's near 80, and that his father had committed suicide or died by suicide many, many years before. And he said, I have felt like I've had an X on my back, and that my father was only remembered for his last act. And he was such a good man. And he said, this has done so much good for me to be able to feel like that stigma has been lifted. And I just think that we just don't know the value that comes to a community of all ages, that just having the conversation. And I want to go into our panel and talking, and everybody just talk openly about this. And I found it interesting in doing some research on suicide that there's always warnings about don't go near the why. If you're a family member that has lost, like you two have, that don't wallow in the why, or don't go into the valley of the why. Don't stay there too long. But in talking to Mike, as a community, I think lots of times people have dodged mental health because of fearing the why. And that we as a community need to ask the why. That we, as a parent that has lost a child, you might not ever have that answer. But I think when you look at the suicide rate and you see that in the last decade, that number has increased, you know, by tremendous amount. If we as a society as a whole, if we as a county, if we as a city, if we as a state keep ignoring those numbers and how they're soaring, and we keep allowing insurance not to pay for depression, if we keep saying, well, we can't do anything about it, we can't fix it, then how is the problem ever going to get better? So I'm opening that up to ask Representative Kevin Tanner, I slide right into that, because he was asked by our Governor Kemp. He was appointed to chair the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission for our state. And I know it makes me anxious because he's leaving that position December 31st, and I know what heart he had for that role. I'm anxious because I don't know the next person will share that same heart. I wanted him sitting beside Mike because Mike works for Lieutenant Governor, and I want to make sure that Mike ensures that somebody else will get that role that does have that same heart, because I don't know any issue that the state is facing that's more critical than mental health. I don't know. It affects everyone. It affects, I read something that there's 135 people that are touched by any person that commits or dies by suicide. And that those people are so impacted. And of that, if you multiply it out, there's 6 million and something people in the United States that are affected every year by someone dying by suicide. So I don't know how anything is affected anymore. So Representative Tanner, if you could share about the commission and what you've seen and why mental health is important to you.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and Mike, thank you for your willingness to be here, and for you, your willingness to be here. You know, I was at a business today, a successful business owner, big guy, stocky guy, and I had mentioned to his lady working there where I was going to be going tonight, and he came in and told me, he said, Becky told me where you were going tonight, and I just want you to know that I tried to kill myself 3 years ago, and he said, and almost succeeded. And he said I was depressed, felt very unworthy, and he said if I can ever be of help, you know. So we don't know how many people are actually affected by this, and you cannot tell by looking, you cannot tell by talking to them. You know, I spent a good bit of my career working in law enforcement, coming in contact with some of the same people over and over that suffered from severe mental health issues, acute mental health issues like schizophrenia, bipolar, acute depression, and just really didn't have the answers and the ability to solve those problems. So I've always been affected by it, going to those suicide calls. But then several years ago, I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me personally was I had an attorney friend of mine who I'd met through law enforcement call me and said, Kevin, I've got a cousin who suffers from mental health issues, specifically schizophrenia, and they're in mental health court. And our mental health court system does a good job, and this person was on their medication, and when they're on their medication, this person was living a very productive, healthy life, and asked me if I'd rent a house to them, and I said absolutely. So we did. 2 years, very successful relationship. The guy worked a full-time job, paid his rent 3 days early every month until one day I didn't get his rent. About 10 days late, I called him, and he didn't answer. 30 days late, I called him. His phone had been disconnected. I called his sister, who I'd gotten to know over the course of the 2 years. She was in tears, talking about that he'd graduated from mental health court and he'd come off his medication, and that she'd been crying out for help, and there's nothing else that she could do. Long story short, had to have him evicted. He ended up getting arrested, and ultimately about 1.5 years later, I ran into the cousin, the attorney, and asked about him, and she said, kind of dropped her head and said, well, his sister hadn't heard from him in a while, and went back to the old home place where they had grown up and found his skeletal remains in a sleeping bag in the woods where he'd been sleeping. And I thought then, you know, we have to do more, because here was a situation that could have been prevented. And then we start seeing the numbers, and I live in Dawson County, And we rank among the highest per population in the state of kids dying from suicide, high school age children dying from suicide. And there has to be more that we can do. So we've worked with Mike and the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker and the Governor and others, and we formed a 4-year commission to tackle the mental health issue. I will tell you that between those individuals and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, they have appointed some of the best, brightest minds in the country around mental health issues. Everything from adolescent mental health, from depression, from suicide, to the very acute schizophrenic, bipolar mental health conditions. And we've rolled up our sleeves and we're going to work. And I was blessed to be appointed to chair that. Look forward to continuing to work on that. But it is a challenge. And like Cindy said, it's not an issue that too many people really want to take on because there's not any real easy answers. So looking forward to continuing to work on that, Cindy.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to ask our sheriff, what is it you see with mental health in the community?
Well, mental health has and continues to be a problem. Not only a problem for people suffering from it, but it's a problem because, as Representative said, and everyone that's spoken already has said, there's no good answer. There's no good alternatives. There's no easy access to treatment. There are some things that we're getting better at. Here in Forsyth County, Commissioner Mills and I and others, we've been blessed to be awarded a grant, a mental health grant, that's creating a co-responder model so that when we do get those crisis calls, because law enforcement often gets that call because people don't know what else to do. And that's a little different than what John was talking about or Mike was talking about when it's that unknown thing that happens. We're talking about someone who has devolved into a crisis now. We're usually the ones that get that call. And so trying to get that person help, because criminal justice enforcement is not the answer. Help is needed. And so there's not been a good answer for that. But this co-responder model that will allow us to get people into mandatory treatment, at least to stabilize a crisis, and then hopefully follow up. That's something that's not happening in many places. So Kevin, Representative, it's kind of one of those things that I think that is while it's not proven yet, I think it's a great opportunity because now someone's in crisis. We were able to stabilize that crisis, but now we can follow up. We can follow up a wraparound service. We can follow up to check if they're taking their medicine. We can follow up to this without taking law enforcement action. We're taking community action, right? We're doing it with love, not with handcuffs. And if we can do that, you know what? We truly got a chance to save some people that right now are getting thrown away through the cracks that people are trying to fill, but there's no easy answer. So I think we have to continue doing those kind of things. We answer on average 1.3 suicide or suicide threat calls a day in Forsyth County.
Wow.
And people think because, we're a community that has a lot of wealthy people, a community that has such an excellent school system that we shouldn't have problems like that. But as we know, that suicide doesn't, it's not a discriminator.
No.
People that are wealthy have these same kind of problems. People that, it's the same thing. I think also there is a stigma that people think, I know that Mike, you've had people say things to you like, and I'm sure that John has too, well, was your son on drugs?
Yeah, or assumed he was on drugs.
Or what signs did you miss?
Yeah.
I mean, they just think that there had to be.
My least favorite is, are you mad? Or were you mad at Daniel? And part of you wants to be that way, but he was ill, and John said it, and it takes a while to process that, but how are you mad at somebody who's ill?
And even before Ron got into office, when we started talking about mental health issues, we were talking with the judges, and we did something called surveying mapping, and we were looking at through our how our 911 calls came in and what they called the repeat callers, and how you could map those callers and know how many of them dealt with mental health. And I was amazed at how many people are what you would call repeat offenders and that's how our jails become mental health hospitals, because what happened when they decided to close down all the mental health facilities, our jails became the go-to place. And I mean, it was fair or not fair. Families that deal with mental illness on a reoccurring basis become so desperate, they turn to the sheriff and they beg. I mean, plead. I mean, they get so desperate. I mean, I've talked to county commissioners throughout the state. I listened to the classes in class, and some of them are between 50 and 70% of people inside their jail are people with mental health issues.
We spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for inmate mental health care. And that's not the answer. Obviously, if someone's committed a serious crime, that's one thing. But jails and mental health care inside of a jail is not the answer to the folks who have persistent mental health issues that need treatment and need consistent help.
But what has this meant to the training of your deputies? I know because we're funding, but they have CIT training. Talk about that for a second.
So we realize that it's becoming such a prevalent thing that we respond to because, again, crisis, we get called. So we're putting all our deputies through crisis intervention training, a week-long training, dealing with de-escalation, recognizing mental illness, how to talk to someone in a crisis, how to recognize signs and symptoms that someone may be suffering from a mental health break and having some type of crisis, some kind of issue that's going on. So we're doing all of those things. I have a full-time coordinator in mental health, the co-responder model that we're going to. So we're trying to be groundbreaking in what we do, but it's a drop in the bucket. But at least it's a drop that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And maybe we could put some more drops in the bucket. And then maybe, again, I will tell you from experience, and Mike and I got to spend quite a bit of time together, and such a tragedy I can't imagine because we have sons about the same age. And, it does affect us. I've lost two of my best friends in life to suicide. One is a young father, young 20-something-year-old, and one a former police chief. And it was depression, to John's point. Both of them were suffering from depression. And they're big, burly guys, and they didn't want to talk about it. And, we didn't push hard enough. Hindsight 2020, when all the friends get together, you start seeing, in some cases, little signs. In Mike's case, and it sounds like in John's case, there were no signs to see. And so you didn't miss anything. But we've got to be willing to have those hard conversations with people, friends, family, whatever that is, or us as law enforcement on a call to try to dig into that. How do we get help? How do we intervene before someone makes a permanent solution their choice when that's not really a choice for them to make?
John, let's jump back since you work with teenagers a lot. What, for a parent, and I know this is hard because the teenage years are what kid is not, or the young adult years are tough for parents to recognize a cranky teenager versus a child in depression, a child that is in episodic, the roller coaster of being truly depressed. What's some signs, or what is something parents need to, or some questions that parents need to be asking or looking for?
Well, I think it's a really difficult question, right? If you Google signs of depression, right, and signs of suicide, you'll see what you would expect to see. Children, especially in teens, I shouldn't even say in teens, with everybody, it's a change in your behavior is a big one. You stop doing the things you love to do. You stop talking, you become more reserved. More stress, more anxiety, all this frustration that you can see. Like, Will didn't have any of those.
And Daniel didn't either.
Daniel didn't
now,
either.
There are many people that do, right? So it just depends on the situation. I think what really was interesting with me, what I learned in spending so much time with the teenagers, is how they responded when I would say things like, I don't know either. When I would say things like, wow, I never had to do that. I, as a parent, had no idea how difficult my son had it growing up in today's crazy world. And it's even crazier now than it was 10 years ago. In fact, right now, because of the pandemic, you can't compare it to anything. And so the concept of a parent wanting their teenager to live the same life that they live is an impossible dream. It will never, ever happen. Will could not live the life that I live, that I led. I could never truly understand what it was like to be a 15-year-old when I was 45. And so I guess the point is it's hard to see the signs. The point I'm trying to make is our kids respond to understanding. But Will didn't think that I understood that if Will makes a mistake today, every person he ever met will read about it on Instagram and Facebook and social media by dinner. Will didn't think I understood that in order for him to play a varsity sport, he needed to make a travel team when he was 10. Will didn't think I understood that in order to get into University of Georgia, you have to get straight A's in AP classes. I didn't have to do any of that. I went to one of the finest academic institutions in the country, Northwestern University. I never even took an AP class. And I certainly didn't get straight A's. So as a parent, I was thinking Will was living the life that I lived. And I had no idea really what he was up against. And not once did I say to him, wow, this is hard. I don't have the answer, but let's figure it out together. I never showed him that I understood. So there's this, a trusted adult knows and shows, right? Knows and shows that it's hard. And that's that understanding part that I talked about. Will never said to any of his friends, yeah, my dad really gets me. I don't have answers and I don't have solutions for you guys or for the audience tonight. But I'm much more aware. And that is a huge advantage now when I think of my kids today. I understand what they're going through and I let them know that I understand. They still have to do it, right? And it's still going to be hard, it's still difficult. But Will always heard me say how wonderful this is, how great this is, look at these fields, look at these opportunities you had that I didn't have. And I never really once really dissected the day in the life of a 15-year-old in the year 2010 or today, year 2020. So it's kind of a long-winded answer. The signs may be there, those typical signs you would expect from somebody who is struggling. But remember, depression is maskable, so they can hide it from you. So what am I trying to do? Get them to not hide it by showing them that I understand and getting them comfortable. If Will would have thought that I understood, he might have said, you know, Dad, I'm just never happy. I don't understand. I just can't. Because he knew, but he didn't say that because he knew I would have said, oh, come on, look at you, you're big and strong. When I was your age, that happened to me, that turned out good. Just like every other father did, just like my wonderful father did to me. So that concept of showing awareness and showing understanding will enhance the opportunity to talk about it. I think that's the main message that I learned. These kids get it, but their parents don't. Show them that you get it, and you're going to encourage them, and that culture is created.
But you really touched on something that last year at our summit, we had a professor from Georgia State that had written a book about the pressures that her students were under when they were in high school in relation to suicide. And it was, and it was all from students. And that was who she had interviewed. And her students were very honest about how unknowing their parents were about the pressures and the suicide ideology that they had went through because of high school pressure. Yeah. And she spoke about it very eloquently, just about the rigorous schedules and the demands and the AP classes and the the IB and everything else that to get in the Ivy League or to get in this or to get in that, and to carry the sporting and the everything else. And
Yep.
so I think that there is something to be said, and I think that there's something, maybe lessons for parents to learn, that they're wanting to keep up with the Joneses as much as the kids, or more than the kids. And that there are lessons to learn. At what point is it too much? Or at what sacrifice? Maybe.
And it's the two things, right, that as a parent that I was unaware of just how difficult their life was and how different their life was than mine. And two, that 1 in 5 of them suffer from depression, and it's real and it's everywhere and it can happen right here in this town. So those two factors made me think everything was great and it's wonderful and I am living the dream.
John?
It costs me. And that's what we're trying to do tonight, is just, we're not trying to doom and gloom this thing, right? We're trying to improve the will to live, right? If we can do that, we're going to reduce suicide, right? And to do that is enhance relationships, and it's at all levels. And I think of who best understands a teenager, and I'm looking at a police officer. Who best understands what it's like to be a police officer right now, today, in this craziness, than another police officer? Talk to each other, express to each other, be there for each other, right? Who understands, and Mike and I have a bond, who understands what it's like to be a man our age who lost their son to suicide? We get it, we've been there, we understand, and so there's that comfort there. When Mike came to my house in hopes that I could help him because he needed someone to talk to that would understand what he's going through. When he left, the last thing I said to him, I said, you need to understand, Mike, how much you just helped me. I was talking to someone who truly understands what I'm going through. That's the key here, is the sharing of understanding and understanding each other's obstacles and encouraging that way that should take place.
Cindy, I wanted to make a point that John brought up, I mentioned to say about the invisible epidemic. The CDC has an anonymous survey they do periodically, and they published it a few weeks ago, a lot of national press, but 25% of Americans 16 to 25 had seriously considered suicide in the past several months. Now, COVID has spiked that number quite a bit because it's caused a massive mental health crisis across the country. But so the people out there watching this, again, who are like John and I thinking, hey, yeah, it's not going to happen. 1 in 4 young people thought about it this summer or this spring. That's a lot of people. And those people, need to be reached, and just wanted to make that point.
And it is a very valid point. We ask the church to be a part of this. We're in a church. But Nathan, what role can a church play in this?
Yeah, well, first of all, to the fathers that are sharing today, thank you. I have a 6-year-old and 4-year-old, and I can't imagine going through that, and the bravery and the courage you guys are showing to talk about it is huge. And thanks for having me here. And there's a lot of people running around behind the scenes that deserve a fist bump and a shout out as well. But I think in the past, I've grown up in traditional church circles, and I think there was a stigma that existed around people that had mental health. You only go see a counselor if the brakes are falling off the wagon, right? You only go see a counselor if you are about to get divorced. We never really viewed mental health as something that you can take preventative measures against. It was only crisis management. And so we also historically in the church have viewed mental health as some sort of an indicator of a weak faith or immaturity. And it's just so shameful that that's been the response of pastors and clergy in the past. And so what you guys are doing, I'm hoping that we're following suit in the faith circles where we're trying to mainstream the conversation, trying to normalize the fact that this can happen to anybody, anywhere. And if there should be anywhere that's safe to ask questions, if there should be anywhere that's safe to express that things aren't okay, I would hope that it would be a church lobby. I would hope that it would be within your faith circles. I'd hope that it would be across the dinner table from a mother or a father. And hopefully there's some relational skills that are being learned inside the church circles that can help normalize those conversations, and have a level of comfortability in other people's discomfort. And so what I mean by that is not letting your jaw hit the floor when a child or a friend or a colleague opens up about something that's going on. Being able to empathize and sit with them in the pain, and recognize that it is biological. You know, we don't scold someone for taking Advil when they've got a broken arm. You know, so what should we think it's any different when someone sees a mental health professional and tries to get on a medication or a pathway to bring healing to their heart or bring healing to their mind? So hopefully there's a relational side of things that we're learning inside of faith circles, that this isn't something you can just pray away. This isn't something that you can just throw Bible verses at. This is something that has to be done within the confines of relationship, where we're combating aloneness, combating isolation, where we're making sure that the people that we're doing life with know that the door is cracked open, and even one step further, asking, how are you doing? No, really. How are you really doing? Knowing the statistics that we know, the chances are we are in the same circles as somebody who is a candidate, is somebody that could be threatened with this. So letting them know that it's okay to talk about this. I'm not going to try to fix you. I'm not going to try to change you. I want to journey on this with you, and we're going to tackle this together.
So true. And none of us are mental health experts.
Right.
But we all are people that care.
Right.
And we all are people that have a heart and for other people. And we all love other people, and we have a heart wanting to help. And with that, I mean, any of you can send messages of questions. I mean, we might not can answer, but we can point you toward people that can. I know that Nathan's put together like a help page that we were going to put out there. But before, we were going to try to hold this as close to an hour as we could, because we didn't want to prolong it. We know people's time are very valuable, but I want to be able to end with hope. I think it's very important to do that. And I know that everything I've read about people that are in depression or suicidal is that they feel hopeless. And I think that if we can offer, besides offering love, and we have a lot of that, is offering hope. And so I want us to end, each of us that are on this panel, of offering some words of hope. And we can start, Nathan, if you want to start, and we'll come this way. Or
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the document. I think Tammy's going to be posting a link. It's a interactive PDF, and it's just a link to a lot of local mental health providers. There's actually a lot of really great therapists and psychiatrists and whatnot. So it's got kind of the full gamut. It's even got some links to some hotlines that you can call if you feel like you don't know where to turn. My counselor is in there as well. I'm a pastor. I need help too, right? So let's talk about hope for a minute. It's a very powerful thing. I believe that no one is created on accident, right? I think that everybody has intrinsic value. I think that everybody has intrinsic purpose. And what that means to me is I think there is a problem on planet Earth that you're meant to solve. And if we don't have you here, then that means there's something that's going to remain not okay. And I think that if everyone could embrace that there is value just in my existence, and I may not be all okay, I may not be who I want to be, but that continual just work in progress of trying to take one more step. I'll go biblical for a minute. I'm a pastor, so I'll fulfill the stereotype. In Lamentations chapter 3, it talks about the Lord's mercies being made new every morning. And so to me, when I think of with that is I think God has given us exactly what we need to take on the set of 24 hours that are on today. And when we try to take on tomorrow's messes on today's mercies, that's when we find ourselves burning out and becoming susceptible to mental health issues. And so I think one day at a time, there's a mess that you got to clean up today. And if you can just give your best effort, you'll start feeling a little bit of momentum, feeling a little bit of reconnection to that purpose that God sets you here on planet Earth. But if the sun is up, there's breath in your lungs, there's purpose for you, and we need you here.
That's kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, that's good.
Well done. Look, I guess the one thing I will say is hope is, particularly if you're a parent or you're a family member and you have someone with mental health crises, who maybe has suicidal ideologies and things like that. Understand, I think we're better than most. When I say we, I'm speaking of the sheriff's office here. Our folks are well trained, and we're getting better, unfortunately, all the time through practice. We don't want to criminalize anything. We want to provide resources, help steer things in the right direction. Don't be scared to call us. Don't think that something bad is going to happen. Unfortunately, bad things have happened when people are in mental health crises. But we're better than most at being able to diffuse that and help get you on a path to the resources that are currently available. So have hope that there are people who are trying to work really hard on this. Representative Tanner, Mike and I, all of us, Cindy, that we're working towards trying to get those resources in our community that help us get better, to provide help to our own people, our own community. And there is help out there. To Nathan's point, you were created for a purpose. What that is, sometimes it's hard to figure out. But if you can hang on another day, tomorrow may be that day that you figure it out. So hang tight, ask for help, be willing. John spoke very well. Be willing to talk about it. Don't be scared to talk about it, because you'll be surprised how many people love you, how many people care about you, and how many people will pour themselves into you if they know you need something.
Yeah, John, you're in the middle, so we let John go.
Yes.
I have to unmute here. So, yeah, a couple of great responses right there. And hope has been, the major buzzword of these past 10 years for me. And I look at it in a way of the power that we have to deliver hope. And that to me has been one of the more eye-opening things, the joy that a person can get by delivering hope to somebody else.
Wow.
Whether it's understanding that it's just being there, right? That it's so important, right? And the more you give, the greater the will to live. I say that all the time, right? And the giving of hope is so possible, because hope can be in the little things. And I think that's really what got me through my son's death. On that day, I think Mike experienced the same thing. I experienced the worst tragedy a person could ever go through. And on that very same day, I was the recipient of more love than any other day of my life. And it was very noticeable. And I was very thankful, I was very blessed to be able to recognize it. And it was my friends that just gave me hope. And I realized that this was helping them by helping me, right? And so when I get the calls, and I get the calls a lot, hey, I'm worried about my son, I'm worried about my daughter, I'm worried about my friend. The first thing I say is, take it seriously, let's get professional help. But if you can, get them to help somebody. Because when you give of yourself helping others, it just makes you feel good, right? And I think that's where that hope is. So the foundation, we always say we're here, we want to raise awareness, we want to increase education, but we want to deliver hope to each other. Because if I can do that, I can get you guys to build that relationship.
Thanks. Yeah, hope is the word, and that's why I'm here today. I mean, I won't share details. I know John has talked about his foundation himself have affected the lives of many people going down a dark path. And I already had a person who used to work for me in the past who, because of my story, had made a difference in his life and his struggles. And we want to make more of a difference. And John's, for 10 years, has touched innumerable people with his foundation, with his message of hope and teen friends and teammates. One thing my wife and I are doing to hopefully provide some more hope is that me being from an academic type engineering background, we've started called the D3 Research Foundation, a charity to raise money to award grants to researchers who are looking for novel cures and approaches for the biochemistry of depression and suicide. And there's more research that's better now than there ever has been. So the hope is that the science is getting better. They just actually approved essentially the first possible drug for people with acute suicide ideation, a nasal spray related to ketamine. There's a lot of things going on there, and society is more aware, and John made a great point. 10 years ago, we didn't really know how hard it was on our kids. It's getting more and more aware of how hard our kids have it. It's getting more societal awareness of how tough that generation is having things, and so that gives me hope that we'll be able to do more with it. But we've got to keep up hope, because I think that's why we're here. And Nathan mentioned that God wants us here to hope and work and to try to do all the good Methodists, do all the good you can, all the ways you can, all the places you can. And I think that's what we got to, if we're not doing that, we just need to throw in the towel. So my hope is that maybe I'll be able to raise some money and give to some young professor somewhere who's got a wild idea that may be a little bit out of the mainstream that turns out to be a revolutionary new way that we can help these people.
Wow.
Well, one of the things, if you're a parent watching this tonight, I think John said it, and as a father of 4 daughters, sometimes it's difficult to realize how challenging our children's lives really can be. I've got a daughter at the University of Georgia. I've got one that's grown with 2 little boys, and one that's a junior and one that's in 7th grade. Little girls, they have it tough. It's a challenging life. They're pushed. They push themselves really more than I do. But I think it's important as parents, if we're watching this tonight, that we make it clear to them that it's okay not to be okay, that it's okay to talk. It's okay not to be the best. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to share those feelings with your mom or your dad or your friends. And sometimes it's okay that you just need to ask for some help or a time out in life. We all need those. And if you're watching this tonight and you're a young person or an older person and you're having those suicide, I know life sometimes gets to the point to where we feel like we're the only person going through this, the only person in this situation. We've heard Mike and John and the relationship they've developed, how that is a healing process to be able to talk. And I assure you, one of the things that we found from a state perspective that's having great success in people who suffer from mental health issues is peer support groups. Peer support groups so that you're there with someone who's suffering from depression. If you're suffering from depression tonight and you're thinking about suicide, there's someone else that's going through the very same thing you are, someone else has been through that, and someone who's on the other side of that you can talk to. The state has developed a hotline. We'll make sure that number gets out there tonight. But if you need someone to talk to, reach out to them. They can put you in contact with the right people. Also, we all have to recognize, whether we're a parent, we're a pastor, we're a police officer, there's some situations, and you may be counseling with someone as a pastor, that you recognize, this person needs more help than I'm able to give them. Just talking to them is not going to get us there. Some folks do need, because it's a biological, medical condition, they need medication. And in order to get that, they're going to have to go and see the psychiatrist or the doctor to be able to get professional help. Don't be afraid to help get folks the help they need and to talk about it. So there's hope. The organizations like this, they're doing great things. If I can ever be of service to you, and let me say one last thing and I'm going to close. So many times we who are maybe from affluent families feel like that we don't need to talk about this because it doesn't happen to us, and John hit on this. I know someone very, very successful here in Forsyth County whose son suffers from schizophrenia. It came on while he was in college, no signs, just bam, there it was. And with all the resources he had, it took him 2 years to get his son the help he needed. If you're suffering like that, if you have a family member and you just can't find those resources, don't give up. There's hope. It's out there. Reach out to the right folks. Reach out to us. We'll help guide you in the right direction. Yep. Cindy, thank you for putting this together and for all you're doing to give back in this area.
Thank you, Kevin. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I apologize if there was any technical difficulties. We're going to be recording it and getting it on there for you. I want to thank Jason Henline for all the effort and the work he put into it. I want to thank the Forsyth County Drug Awareness Council and Tammy Nicholson for all that she does on a continuous basis. We have monthly meetings, And there's hope in that. There is. There's so much hope. We have mental health council meetings, and I want to leave us with just the thought of just the hope that lies within each of us. I think about how desperately I want the world to be a kinder place. So much that you see on the internet constantly, on Facebook, social media, is so much anger. And I think of personalities that are fragile. And when they live amongst us and all they see is anger all the time, and how that weighs so heavy on them, anger about just everything, the political climate, just everything. It's just so much unsettledness, and there's no stability. And you know what that does to a person that's fragile and unstable. And you know, you want to point them to the rock. You know, you want to point them to something that is stable. And I think that we as leaders, you know, when we live in a place where much is given and where we have much, that there's much expected, and that we have a responsibility to show people how much we do love and how much we do care. And I have a responsibility as a grandmother of 5 to teach them to be kind, to teach them to love others, and to teach them to give back to the world. And I think that that's all something that each of us can do, is that we can be kind, that we can be good, and we can be loving to other people, and we can go make a difference in the world. And I thank each of you for doing that, and I hope that each of us can plant those seeds of being who God wants us to be. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for doing all you can, and let's go make the world a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. Cool.